Hi, I'm Hannah Holder, and as it comes to an end of this fall semester, I'm able to reflect over the things I've learned in my field placement for my Models of Instruction class. This past semester, I was lucky enough to be placed in Toller Elementary School. Toller is located 30 minutes outside of Stephenville in a rural area. The school and everyone I had the chance to interact with there was fabulous. My wonderful mentor teacher was Miss Harkins. She was the writing teacher for the 4th grade. Last school year, Miss Harkins won the Teacher of the Year award, which was well deserved after 20 years of teaching. After reading and learning about classroom management in class, I was able to see it in action through Mrs. Harkins' classroom. My own definition for classroom management is skills and techniques that are used to maintain an effective environment of a classroom. Some of the ways Mrs. Harkins managed her class was through rules and procedures, behavioral strategies, attention grabbers, and most importantly, consistency. The picture on the left is just one of Mrs. Harkins' behavioral strategies. When the class exceeds the noise level stated, a letter of noise is turned over. If all of the letters of noise is turned over, they have to sit boy, girl, at lunch. Rules and procedures are key elements to classroom management. Though many people believe the two to be the same, they are two different things. Rules are guidelines on how students should act in the classroom, while procedures are a set of actions that happen routinely in the classroom. Miss Harkins has her list of rules posted on her wall, just like any effective teacher would. Her rules are: be polite and respectful, be on time with the correct supplies, follow all directions that are given the first time, and be aware and follow the rules of the Toller Elementary Handbook. Posted right below her rules, she has also created a social contract with her students. They created this contract on the first day of school together, and then they all signed. These rules and social contract help guide how the students act and interact in her classroom. Mrs. Harkins established her procedures from day one. One of the procedures is the changing of classroom jobs every Monday morning. These jobs are also carried out throughout the week and then changed again the very next Monday. Another procedure that happens is answering questions. Students must raise their hand and wait to be called on to answer questions. She has plenty of others, such as entering and exiting the classroom. During my time in her classroom, I was able to watch lesson deliveries by Mrs. Harkins. In this lesson shown, Ms. Harkins teaches how a subject and predicate are both needed to make a full sentence. For her focus, Mrs. Harkins only spoke with just a predicate or just the subject. This grabbed students' attention. During the instructional delivery, she held a class meeting and used anchor charts and graphics to teach. She also repeated key phrases. During guided practice, she used what she taught to start kernel essays for their personal narrative. She started her model and guided students on what they will do. She had the students help create the sentences. During independent practice, students started to write their own kernel essay for their favorite memory personal narrative. She walked around the room, checking students for understanding. During their closure, she had students check and underline the subject and the predicate of each kernel essay of their table buddies. I had the opportunity to teach a lesson during my time there. My lesson was over regular verbs in past, present, and future tense. I was able to collaborate slightly with Mrs. Harkins as we had to make content match. She also requested that I included a graphic organizer in my lesson that she would use with her other classes. The TEK she provided states that the students will be able to edit drafts for the use of past tense irregular verbs. However, through informal assessment, she recognized the need to scaffold this learning. So, she had us start with regular verbs in different tenses. The objective of my lesson is students will be able to recognize and write regular verbs in past, present, and future tense. All of the lesson and activities done throughout the lesson go back to this objective. For my focus, students did a think, pair, and share over what their own personal definition of past, present, and future tense means. For my instructional delivery, we filled out this graphic organizer together that went into their journal. I had students act out some of the verbs, and we talked about what happened in the past, what was happening right now, and what will happen in the future. For our guided practice, students played the game Three Corners. I placed sentences up on the headboard, and students would move around the room to the correct sign of what tense was used in the sentence. During independent practice, students got to sort different sentences, verbs, and the helping word or ending of past, present, and future tense. Students were very successful during this lesson and even finished very early. We were able to use our extension that I had planned. The students got to play charades and act out different verbs. Then they had to say the verb in the past, present, and future tense. During the closure of the lesson, students got with their table and created 3 different sentences using a certain verb. Each sentence was a different tense. So they wrote 1 sentence for past, 1 sentence for present, and 1 sentence for future, all using the same verb. I was able to observe Ms. Harkins using many different forms of assessment. She used this assessment to monitor her students' learning and guide and influence her lessons. There are 2 major forms of assessment, formative and summative. Formative assessment is ongoing and informal, while summative assessment is used at the end of a unit to see what students have learned. This assessment is typically taken up for a grade. One form of formative assessment that I was able to observe in Mrs. Harkins' class was revising conferences. When a student's ticket number was called, they conferenced with Ms. Harkins to go over their personal narrative. She was able to monitor and informally assess their learning through these conferences. Through these conferences, she was able to form many lessons that the students needed to be taught. One form of summative assessment that I observed in Mrs. Harkins' class was the turning in of their final draft of their personal narrative. This was at the end of the personal narrative unit and the end of their writing process for the first time. Students also earned a grade for their personal narrative. From my observations, formative assessment was used more frequently in class. It was used more frequently because of the writing conferences held. She used the data that she collected from this informal assessment and used it to guide many lessons that she taught the class so that they could put them in their journals, as shown above. Over the past semester, I was able to grow as a pre-service teacher. I learned from observing Mrs. Harkins' classroom management, lesson planning, and lesson delivery. Here are some of my takeaways from being in Ms. Harkins' class. Though I admired many of the things Mrs. Harkins did, she often had students completing worksheets. Many of the worksheets she had students complete could have been changed into interactive activities. In my classroom, I want my students to complete less worksheets than I saw these students complete. While there was use of worksheets, Ms. Harkins also had many engaging activities. From 4 corners to charades, the class learned best from playing. The all-time class favorite had to be bingo. Mrs. Harkins found many ways to adapt bingo to her lessons because students begged to continue playing quite often. Mrs. Harkins was also very encouraging. At the end of their personal narrative unit, they had a writing celebration. Students got to read their peers' narratives and leave feedback that was personable. Mrs. Harkins then followed with a celebration where she made a positive comment on each of the students' narratives. She also handed out Pop Rocks because, of course, the stories rocked. Both of these ideas are things that I want to carry into my future classroom. I want my students to be engaged with activities that they can interact with. I also want to be encouraging and have a positive classroom atmosphere with my students. Another thing I found very effective in Mrs. Harkins' classroom was her use of this sheet of paper. She had a sheet of paper for each class that had names on it, and at the top it had the assignment listed on it. She was able to write down the assignment, write down if students turned it in, and write the grade when she graded. It helped her stay on track with what she had graded and who hasn't turned in an assignment. I wanted to end my reflection video with a sort of video diary, if you will, about my biggest takeaways and the things that I thought I had to work on the most after being in Ms. Harkins' classroom this past semester. The very obvious thing that I have to work on the most is my behavioral strategies. I think being in someone else's classroom was very hard because she had established behavioral strategies that weren't my own, and so it was very hard whenever I was teaching a lesson to try and use someone else's behavioral strategies because I felt very uncomfortable being in someone else's classroom and trying to manage their own students. I didn't want to seem like I was pushing too hard, but it definitely was something that I needed to work on. When I was doing my micro teach, I noticed that whenever I went to go work with one student who was struggling, a group of students or a student or two would start to ramble off and get a little bit off task because they had finished sort of their task, and so their behavioral started going a little bit out of hand. I was able to rein it back in, but I think I could have definitely done a better job of that. My biggest takeaway from the class was how much relationships truly matter in the classroom. Building the relationship with your students day one builds that trust and builds that respect that you need from your students. My very first day in the classroom, I went up to each student at their desk. I asked them their name, I shook their hand, I introduced myself, and I even asked them a question, whether it was, what's your birthday, or what's your favorite animal, what's your favorite color. I asked something and tried to even make a connection like, oh, you love zebras, I love zebras too. I tried to make some kind of connection with them that made them realize that I was there for them. I wanted to make my presence known in the classroom, and I really think it paid off because every Tuesday they were so excited whenever they walked in. They would peek their head around the door and see that I was there, and they lit their eyes up. I was even absent one week, and Ms. Harkins emailed me and said that her students missed me and that it was Tuesday and Ms. Holder wasn't there, and that they were very upset that I was not there to spend the hour or two that week that I'm there with them. I think building that trust and that relationship also paid off during my micro teach. While I did have some students that got a little off task, I think that was mainly because they had finished early. But I think in my micro teach, after I built those relationships with them, they were very excited and willing to listen to me, and they trusted what I had to say, and they were very engaged. Very often when I taught the entire class or had the entire class's attention, I didn't have any problems with them during that. I really do think it was because they respected me and they knew who I was and what I expected. When I talked to Ms. Harkins, she even said that the biggest thing as a teacher is establishing those relationships from day one. Yes, you will struggle with your students, and yes, you might have a hard time trying to connect with your students, but you can always find at least one small connection. And I think that is something that I took away most this semester after my time in the class. I did not think I would get very emotional leaving class. I thought I was ready to leave and have the semester be finished with, but as I was walking down the hallway with them and they were all saying bye to me and that they truly enjoyed me being in their class. I couldn't help but get teary-eyed while I was walking down the hall. I was able to hold it in until I got to my car, but it was very emotional, and it is because of those relationships that I built. And I truly do believe that that was the thing that I took away the most from this semester in my field placement.